Dear friends, welcome to another episode of Geopolitical and Military News. In this video, we will talk about the beginning of an internal debate in Switzerland to reassess the country's policy of neutrality, a debate motivated by the terrible Russian invasion of Ukraine. In September 1515, Francis I, the newly crowned King of France, supported by the powerful Republic of Venice, faced a powerful force led by the Swiss Confederation in the fields of Melegnano, just 16 kilometers from Milan. This force was composed of what was considered the bravest and most powerful infantry in Europe. However, to the surprise of the Swiss, the French were reinforced by a powerful ally, the Landsknecht, German mercenaries whose reputation as excellent fighters rivaled that of the Swiss mercenaries. The battle lasted for almost 2 days, with the Swiss suffering twice the French casualties, this resulting in the victory of the French king and the French occupation of Milan. As a result of this heavy defeat, the following year, in November 1516, the 13 Swiss cantons signed the perpetual peace with France and the Duke of Milan, seen as the first major neutrality pact signed by Switzerland, which was only momentarily broken 282 years later when France invaded the country. In 1815, shortly before Napoleon Bonaparte's final defeat, the main European powers agreed at the Congress of Vienna that Switzerland was and would forever remain a neutral country. And indeed, since 1815, for nearly 210 years. And after 2 great and terrible world wars that devastated Europe, Switzerland has remained completely neutral, refusing to align directly with any belligerent country. Thus, with the exception of a French invasion in the late 18th century, Switzerland managed to remain neutral for 509 years, something that Vladimir Putin is now threatening to change. By launching his large-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Putin broke a kind of tacit understanding in Europe that no country would start a new war of expansion and territorial conquest on that continent. By launching a war of expansion and territorial conquest on that continent, Putin broke this understanding, which it is important to emphasize was the basis of Swiss neutrality in the post-World War II era. Contrary to what many think, Swiss neutrality has always been adapting over time. It adapted after the end of World War I and underwent a major and profound reformulation after the end of World War II. And it was within the scope of this reformulation that the Swiss decided that they would maintain their secular neutrality as long as the same type of threat that arose during World War II did not reappear in Europe, which is precisely what happened in February 2022 when Putin invaded Ukraine with the aim of annexing new territories for Russia. For many Swiss politicians and military officials, the Russian invasion destroyed the pillars on which Switzerland restructured its neutrality policy in the second half of the 20th century. And it was in response to this that, on the past Thursday, August 29th, a group composed of Swiss politicians, diplomats, analysts, and military officials recommended to the Swiss government the relaxation of its neutrality policy, aiming for greater rapprochement with both the European Union and NATO. According to the report released by this group, the Russian invasion of Ukraine forces a new review of Switzerland's neutrality policy, a review that must consider the new geopolitical context created by Putin in Europe. It is important to remember that 2 other countries famous for their neutrality policies, Sweden and Finland, abandoned neutrality, with both joining NATO in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Just as Switzerland is do now, Sweden and Finland declared that Putin demolished the pillars on which their neutrality policies had been built. In other words, Swedes and Finns basically said that if Putin invaded Ukraine with flimsy excuses just to hide his real purpose, which is the territorial expansion of Russia, he could easily do the same with Sweden and Finland. Countries very close to Russian territory, with Finland sharing a border of more than 1,300 kilometers. Despite Switzerland being far away and surrounded by NATO member countries, the Swiss based themselves on the same fear that led the Swedes and Finns to abandon their neutrality policies. The first practical measure in this regard, defended by this Swiss group, involves lifting the suspension of arms sales. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion, Switzerland has suspended the sale of arms to countries allied with Ukraine to prevent Swiss weapons from being used in the war. This began to change very recently, with Switzerland agreeing to supply spare parts for Leopard 2 tanks damaged in combat in Ukraine. But the Swiss continue to refuse to supply munitions, such as 35mm shells for German Gepard air defense systems. The group of Swiss experts made it clear that Swiss neutrality policy should not simply be abandoned, but should indeed be adapted, just as it was after World War II, which allowed the Swiss to remain neutral throughout the Cold War. However, for this Swiss group, the current geopolitical context is much worse and much more serious than it was during the Cold War. Therefore, it is necessary and urgent that Swiss neutrality be reviewed and reformulated, a process that, according to many sources, will result in an inevitable relaxation or partial abandonment of a neutrality policy that has been in place for over 500 years. And all this because of Vladimir Putin's expansionism.
Thank you for watching the video until the end. If you liked the content, don't forget to leave your like. This helps the channel grow and reach more people. If you didn't like it, leave your dislike and explain in the comments how we can improve. Also, comment on suggestions for topics we can cover here. Insulting comments or those defending dictatorships or war criminals will be summarily blocked. Thank you for your understanding. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button below and hitting the bell to receive all notifications. Thanks. See you next time.